Good afternoon. It's Friday, the 9th of November 2018, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. Your host today, Mike Robinson, and myself, Brian Gerrish. And we're delighted to be joined by David Scott. David, of course, giving us northern exposure from north of the border. Where do we start?
Well, we might as well start with Theresa May and Brexit, because this is a leaked letter that apparently the Times have published from Theresa May to the leader of the Democratic Unionist Party, Arlene Foster, and to Nigel Dodds, who's the deputy leader. And this letter apparently refers to EU demands for proposed Brexit backstop. Of course, this is the Northern Irish border issue again. It's all about a future EU-UK trade relationship, which in fact they haven't even begun negotiating yet. So the letter seems to say the EU, want to maintain a Northern Ireland only backstop to the backstop in case the future negotiations are unsuccessful. I'm clear that I would not accept there being any circumstances or conditions in which that backstop to the backstop, which would break up the UK customs territory, could come into force. And then she said that is why it is critical that the provision for a UK-EU joint customs territory is legally binding in the withdrawal agreement itself, so that no backstop to a backstop is required. Well, the DUP have taken that to mean that the backstop arrangement, as far as Northern Ireland is concerned, will still be included in the text of whatever deal is done. And remember, we've got to remember that this is not about the future relationship with the European Union. This deal that she's talking about, and this backstop to the backstop, is only to do with the so-called divorce agreement. We haven't even begun to negotiate our future relationship yet. So the DUP are presuming that Theresa May is lying, and that in fact that this is going to be written into the deal. That's probably not a bad position for them to take. And as I say, this is only the divorce deal. So what did Sammy Wilson from the DUP have to say? Total betrayal. Well, of course, the DUP pretty key in the situation with Theresa May at the moment, because they are the only people that are maintaining her position as Prime Minister, because she doesn't actually have a majority. But Brian, we've been talking about this issue of the Northern Irish border since pretty much the week after the referendum. This hasn't been unexpected, and here we are 2 years later, and apparently we're still in the same position. And I think if we go back to 2016, we were saying that the Northern Irish border would be used as the excuse for maintaining some form of single market customs relationship, and therefore we're not actually going to leave the European Union.
We were never going to leave the European Union, Mike, and you were absolutely right on the border issue. And of course, Theresa May stressing that UK is going to be with the EU. There is not going to be any separation. It's not only a betrayal, it's an utter lie, and it's becoming even clearer to see.
Well, let's move on, because Jeremy Hunt was in Paris yesterday giving a speech about Britain and France relationship. It was called Britain and France, Past, Present and Future. And he was extremely excited about Britain's past relationship with France. Apparently, we're going to forget hundreds of years of warfare, Brian, and we're going to start Britain's past relationship with France at the time of the First World War. So we're not going to worry about Napoleon or any of that stuff. Well, what did he have to say? He said this. Now, as President Macron said at Sandhurst, Sandhurst was the meeting that where Macron came over to Britain. I think it was March, and they agreed to even closer ties between Britain and France on defence issues. So as President Macron said at Sandhurst, we are weaving a new tapestry. We are at a moment of decision, and the answers we give in the coming weeks and months could determine the shape of Franco-British relations and of relations between Britain and the European and its European partners for many years, perhaps decades to come. He said, we intend to remain a European power into the future, and as we've always been in the past, a European power committed to the security of the European continent. And of course, when he's talking about security, he's also talking about defence.
That's correct, Mike, but also when he's talking about France, he is automatically talking about the EU, because the EU is France. So the bilateral agreements with France, this is another part of the smokescreen, because it isn't really bilateral with France. It is locking us continually into the European Union. And that's why the Franco-British Council assisted all of these meetings behind closed doors at the ambassador's residence in Paris when all of this stuff was being set up. It is a scam. It's a continual scam.
Well, good news, Brian, because here we are. We have, oh, sorry, I'll just move back to that. We have a little bit of video here of Britain and France working together at NATO's Trident Juncture exercise. And, well, this is them apparently conducting an amphibious assault. I'm not even going to try to pronounce the name of the place that they're assaulting, but this apparently is an amphibious assault. Now, I think back to images of amphibious assaults during the Second World War, and it seemed to be a slightly different kettle of fish there, Brian. But here we are. NATO says that this is footage of French and British forces conducting an amphibious assault during NATO exercise Trident Juncture 2018. Trident Juncture 2018 brings together around 50,000 personnel, 10,000 vehicles, 65 ships, 250 aircraft from 31 NATO allies and partner nations held in Norway. The NATO exercise started on the 25th of October and continues until the 7th of November. So it is actually over now. But the point is, this is an assault.
Well, it's mind-blowing publicity gone wrong, Mike, because whatever this is, it's, well, I don't know, it's almost like little models coming ashore, and this isn't an assault. This is something else going on here. But nevertheless, what we can say is people in this country need to wake up. This is an email that was sent to us. It says, Brian, Special Reconnaissance Regiment, previously known as 14 Intelligence Corps, senior commanders have met with EU representative at HQ Northwood recently. Agenda included closer integration. So this is the reality of all this, and this is why, of course, we've got this massive media hype, both from the British government and from the French side, all pointing at total collaboration, unification between the French and the British, in particular. So all being engineered behind closed doors.
Well, thank you very much to everybody that responded to this tweet that we pushed out yesterday about EU military unification. We asked UK column members to take some action on that. They seem to have done that. So thank you very much for everybody that has. And we just want to highlight it again and ask you, if you haven't seen this tweet on my Twitter feed and you haven't retweeted it yet or sent it around, please do. And let's see if we can get some more traction on this.
Absolutely. And people are often saying, what can we do? Well, we thought we'd give you an example here. This is somebody who's written to their MP, Heather Wheeler. I'm writing to ask you about EU military unification. I understand I've seen a great deal of evidence to prove the Conservative government is allowing the whole of UK military, including Army, Navy, Air Force, procurement and Trident, to be given its entirety to the European Union. Few more things said, all very nicely, reasonably. That's absolutely great. And what does the Member of Parliament say? I couldn't agree with you more. I'll write to the mod with your email, encouraging them to stop this nonsense. So the MP is going to forward the email on to the Ministry of Defence and say, well, you naughty people, you shouldn't be doing this. You should stop at once. This, of course, is nonsense. This is a fob off from that particular MP. We'll show you this email as well. This is, you can freeze the screen to have a look at this. But it's gone to Mr. Cox at Parliament, David Davis, Bernard Jenkin. At what point will you speak the truth about EU military unification? There's a lot of information. It talks about the HM Coronation Oath. It's talking about the fact that military unification will include the military and ancillary services, industry, production, engineering. Please don't tell us it's for our security. What are you doing about this? I'm after a response. And they emphasised their email by putting this image as well, which is obviously having a dig at David Davis for those words that, well, Britain's military will be subsumed into the unified military system. But this is a pretty hard-hitting email, also very nicely written. So people are starting to do things, but do not let these MPs get away with it. They need to see that there is massive public support to take the lid off this. And if you're worried about NATO's ability to protect the northern flank, then you may well be aware of this pretty amazing event. Now, 7 sailors were hurt, I don't think seriously, but the second newest ship in the Norwegian fleet would have sunk, except they managed to beach it. So this frigate, ultra-modern, wrecked because it hit a tanker. Many people have asked me, how is this possible? I do have some possible explanations. None of them are good for the Norwegian Navy, but there's something badly wrong. The American Pacific Fleet has had numerous collisions over recent years, and all of those appear to come back on training and preoccupation with everything from gay rights to binary and non-binary sexualization on board rather than professional competence. We'll see if we can do something separate on this.
Maybe they forgot the binoculars.
They might have been looking through the wrong end of the binoculars, Mike. This
Right.
is true.
Okay, well, let's have a couple of advertisements. Quick reminder of Spotlight on HPV vaccines taking place in the Tabernacle, Notting Hill on Sunday, this coming Sunday from 9:30 to 7 p.m. Number of excellent speakers at that. Just reminder again that Facebook's taken the ad for this down, so please share this even if you're not able to attend. That'd be much appreciated. And also AV 9.1, Democracy and Change, taking place on Sunday the 2nd of December 2018 at the Crown Plaza Hotel in London. And details at alternativeview.co.uk.
Okay, well, I just wanted a little bit of focus on the BBC so that we keep the BBC to the forefront of our minds. This was a tweet I pushed out a little while ago, and we had George Orwell giving some good advice, saying that basically the further a society drifts from truth, the more it will hate those who speak it. And he's using a BBC microphone, which I thought was a bit of an oxymoron. But if you go on BBC's webpage, you can see that they are boasting about how transparent they are and how much the public trust them. The BBC is seen as by far the most trusted impartial news provider in the UK. And if you follow this through, you can see their evidence. People's trust has shown some recovery since autumn 2012, though remains a little below early 2012 levels, but it's higher than 2004, so that's all good. Then they've got this sort of thing. So we've got Ipsos Mori here. In comparison with other news providers, the BBC remains by far the most trusted source of news in the UK. I'm not sure who believes this nonsense, but what I noticed is that the BBC considers 15-year-olds adults. So I think in order to boost their ratings, they needed to include CBBC babies or whatever it is. And this one was interesting because we've got basically the BBC is the news source people say they turn to for impartial news coverage. So 50% go to the BBC because it's so much more impartial than other organisations. But if we see a bit more of their own data here, we've got another report. When people rate different news providers, predominantly broadcasters and broadsheet newspapers, which ones receive the highest scores for impartiality, you see that the BBC is just about on a par with Channel 4, the Financial Times, Commercial Radio and the Independent. So I'm not quite sure how those two things reconcile. This amused me because if you go to their transparency page and attempt to go through complaints, there's an error message. So clearly 3.74 billion doesn't actually produce a working website, Mike.
Indeed. Well, let's move on to sort of censorship and so on. And first of all, what have we got here? Social Media Hub. So this is funding from the government's £40 million serious violence strategy will be used to create a 20-strong team of police staff. Now, if you can hear in the background, I don't know whether you can, but they've put the most delightful music to this little video clip. This is from the Home Office, of course, that you can see on screen. The Social Media Hub, they say, will proactively flag illegal and harmful content online from social media companies to take down. It's going to be hosted by the Metropolitan Police, and the new capability will also prevent violence on our streets by identifying gang-related messages generating the most risk and violence. And they're saying that the move follows the serious violence task force chaired by the Home Secretary, urging social media companies to do more to take down these videos. The Home Secretary, they say, invited representatives from Facebook and Google to Monday's meeting to explain the preventative action they are already taking against gang material hosted on these platforms. And this is a new partnership which is being built by the Home Office with the Mayor's Office for Policing and Crime, online content providers, community-based charities and the police. So here's what Sajid Javid had to say. Street gangs are increasingly using social media as a platform to incite violence, taunt each other and promote crime. We're taking urgent action, and the new social media hub will improve the police's ability to identify and remove this dangerous content. Now, maybe this is the time to bring David Scott into the programme. David, on the face of it, it might seem reasonable to some that gang-related content should be taken down from social media. But if we listen to what the government has been saying over recent months and years, the narrative has always been that the police, from the police and the government, that social media is used for intelligence gathering and bulk data collection. They can't have it both ways, surely.
Well, I suppose it depends who defines gang, right? Are you a gang, Mike? You and Brian, do you constitute a gang? Is your social media going to be taken out because of this? We know that there's a background of just putting in anti-terror laws, and those anti-terror laws being used against our own citizens in order to stop them saying unpopular things, unpopular with the government, that is. So yes, okay, let's crack down on gang violence by all means. Is social media really the number one priority in that? I would have thought on the ground, old-fashioned policing would actually be much more effective.
Absolutely. So this seems to me to be the censorship agenda at work, and they're using gang violence, which is at the forefront of the news agenda at the moment, to give an excuse for that. But it doesn't end there, because Sajid Javid had something else to say this week. He said, I will not be afraid to take action. So I wonder what he was not going to be afraid to take action on. Well, in fact, it's grooming and sexual abuse, child sexual abuse, apparently. So he is demanding that companies take more measures or face new legislation. Well, in fact, he was making that demand back in September. And he was saying that really they've got to take online abuse much more seriously. So he was visiting Microsoft HQ in Seattle on Wednesday to convene a hackathon, which will see, well, according to the Home Office, will see industry experts work together to come up with tools to detect online child grooming. So he gave a speech, and he said that there was horrific scale of online child sexual abuse. And he said it was vital that all technology companies go further and develop new tools to keep our children safe. And he said the tools they create will be offered to other companies for free. Now, again, David, it seems to me that if you look at the government's policy on child abuse, and particularly, as we're going to come on to later, the way that the child abuse inquiry is being run, it's pretty clear that the government really doesn't give a damn about this issue. And therefore, I'm going to say that once again, this is a pretty cynical use of a talking point for them, a talking point to try to drive further censorship on social media, because what they're actually developing here are tools for identifying certain types of content and having that removed automatically.
Yes, we see here that there's only one direction of travel, and that's towards greater surveillance of everything you say, everything you think, and anything that will alarm the populace, as child sexual abuse and child grooming rightly does, is being seized on as a reason to introduce more control, because what we're being offered here is an offer to accept that the government, having ignored this problem, having covered up this problem, and having contributed to this problem for decades, is now the organisation that's going to save us from this problem. And as long as we believe that, the government will be happy.
Well, let's move on with the surveillance issue, because another announcement from the Home Office, in fact, this is not quite from the Home Office, this is a Defence and Security Accelerator, and they are asking for the potential to run a competition to develop ways to bring together CCTV feeds from disparate sources into a coherent interface, as they're calling it, providing access to the video feeds in real time. So this is on behalf of UK policing, and they are going to try to better understand the current market capability to meet this challenge in order to fully scope and better design a potential future competition. Now, they're saying that this competition may or may not take place at this point. It depends on the responses they get. So let's have a look at what they are calling for. They want to pull request data from known CCTV systems or video management systems. They want to aggregate the data feed and allow ingestion by a second video management system. They want to access video held in a wide range of existing video standards, including IP, so internet-based stuff. And they want to access multiple concurrent video streams, pull these all together into an aggregated feed. So that's really great, isn't it? This, of course, that what they do say is, so we don't need to worry about it, Brian and David, we don't need to worry about it because they do acknowledge the applicability of due process such as the Police and Criminal Evidence Act and legislation such as the Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act and the General Data Protection Regulations. So, David, we can sleep safe in our beds knowing that. Oh, sorry.
Sadly. Ripper and Pace are going to save us.
That is what they're claiming, yes.
Wow. Yes, and if it's real time and it's live, where does due process come in? Because if due process doesn't happen, well, it's kind of a bit late then, isn't it?
Yes, you can't unsee it.
This is true. This is true. I mean, this all sounds like the lead into the screens we saw in Minority Report with the pre-crime feeds coming in with bits of data and then officials getting round before you commit the crime. Maybe that would be next.
Yes. Okay, well, let's move on to a bit of Scottish news. And where are we starting here? David, a football scandal.
Well, this is a point that we should just acknowledge because some very important issues have come out from this. It's a football scandal regarding the Celtic Boys Club. Now, the founder of Celtic Boys Club, Jim Torbett, has been jailed for 6 years. He's been convicted of sexually abusing boys, and he's now behind bars. Now, that's very good news. But there's a few things about here I want to explore because they're a bit troubling. Now, he founded the Boys Club in 1966, so this goes way back, and he had 2 spells at the club. He left the club and he came back and he abused more boys then. When he was first at the club, he founded it with the support of Celtic FC manager Jock Stein and chairman Robert Kelly. The Boys Club was separate from Celtic Football Club, but very closely linked. So he's been convicted, which is good news. Now, Celtic have made a statement. If you click to the next slide, you'll see that. Now, several aspects of this. They say here, following the conviction of Mr. James Torbett, Gloucestershire, of course, Celtic Football Club wishes to express our deep regret that the incidents took place and sympathy for the victims who suffered abuse. Slightly light, but okay. After the allegations became known in the 1990s, so see what they're saying here, he was there from 1966. For 30 years, we didn't know. Celtic Football Club took steps to develop a new code of conduct and procedures to protect young people. So the response is always institutional and organisational. It's a set of rules. It's new procedures. There's no actual wrongdoing, you understand. No one's responsible. No one's not reporting this. It's just we need to have better procedures. And they go on, they say Celtic Football Club strongly believes that children and young people involved in football have the right to protection from all forms of harm and abuse, and is committed to ensuring this and promoting their well-being through continued cooperation with our children, our carers, our young people, parents, and relevant authorities. So, one, they use the term well-being, which means happiness. We're not talking about well-being, we're talking about welfare. It's very clear. We're talking about significant harm. Secondly, we're talking about sort of an aspect of belief. It seems quite light, but the response again is collective working with other people. This implies that there's no one actually responsible at Celtic. So we'll come back to that in a moment. Now, the next aspect of this I'd just like to highlight, where did this story come from? How did this get investigated? Right? It wasn't the authorities doing the job. It wasn't led by the police. It wasn't led by Celtic Boys Club. It wasn't led by Celtic Football Club. None of these organisations were interested. The people who actually led this was the press, right? It was the Daily Record. So you had victims having the courage to speak out and going to a press that had the courage to print it. And they put this, as you see, banner headline on the front page, and they ran a major campaign. So it was the courage of the Daily Record and the courage of the people who had been abused and who spoke out that brought this to the attention of the authorities. It wasn't any of the organisations or improvements or collaborative working that Celtic are talking about. It was people telling the truth and other people believing them and giving them a voice. Now, there's going to be more legal action over this. So we see here that the victims are now looking to take legal action. Now, this is Patrick Maguire, who's a solicitor with an organisation that deals with personal injuries claims, is not very happy at the statement from Celtic. Right? So he says, we're asking Celtic in their own right for their own past wrongs to do the right thing. The survivors of this abuse have been waiting for a very long time. They won't wait much longer. 1966, these people are getting on now. These people are in their late 50s, 60s. He said, I was very interested, shall we say, in a particular comment that they would choose to pin their colours to such a mass so factually when he talks about the abuse not being known to Celtic until the 1990s. And he then says, when was it that Celtic Football Club knew or ought to have known about what was going on, and when should that club have taken action? Was it in the 90s? I have evidence to the contrary. So here we're seeing the solicitor say that he doesn't believe that statement. So we should watch this carefully. We may see some more people having to take responsibility for allowing this abuse to happen. We may.
And who's Mr. Maxwell? Remind us.
Now, this is to look slightly further at this. We have the SFA are now running an inquiry because
that's the Scottish Football Association.
Yes, the Scottish Football Association, thanks to people like the Daily Record and the people who were abused and had the courage to speak up, they've now set up an inquiry. The Scottish government didn't want to know about this. They didn't want it as part of the official Scottish government inquiry. No, it's an entirely separate one, right? And it's been run by the SFA because they apparently know how to run inquiries. So here's Mr. Maxwell, SFA Chief Executive, and he's saying, I would like to apologise to the survivors and anyone who's been the victim of abuse in Scottish football. It is abhorrent in football and society that these things still occur, as though it's some sort of historical thing and we're almost through it. A strange statement. It is important that we take the right steps by commissioning this review to understand the best way to stop them happening in the future. So we're going to be okay in the future. He said significant strides have been taken to address the issues in the past 18 months. I think Scottish football is a safe place for children, and it's up to us to ensure that going forward, he says with the very Mr. Blair type language. So how's he ensuring this? Well, he's got an inquiry. He's running an inquiry. They've brought in an expert called Martin Henry. So let's have a quick look at him.
Yes. So do I believe that currently young people are safe in football? Yes, pretty much. Is that a paraphrase?
No, that's a verbatim quote. Right now, I mean, to be fair, he did say, "Could it be better?" Yes, it could be a bit better. But basically, what he's saying is, there's not really much to worry about. We're all pretty good here, says Martin Henry. Now, Martin Henry's an expert. He was the very man, right? One of the BBC journalists who will know from the Robert Greene case. He said that Martin Henry is the very man for this job. You can now rely on it be handled properly because Martin Henry's got so much experience. So we should have a little look at some of his experience. Here we see Martin Henry being welcomed to the Scottish Parliament by a parliamentarian who says, I'm sure that colleagues will want to join me in welcoming to the public gallery a number of visitors from LBGT youth, including Jamie Rennie, the Chief Executive, and Martin Henry, the convener of its board. Now, you'll remember the name Jamie Rennie, because Jamie Rennie was the chief executive and before that secretary of this organisation from its founding, and Martin Henry was a director from its founding, and Jamie Rennie was convicted of horrendous child sexual abuse as he was using his position in LGBT Youth Scotland to find targets, and he was subsequently sentenced. And he was, of course, at one point the poster boy of Common Purpose.
Absolutely.
And I think I have to add to that, David, and of course when we started to speak out about some of these links and connections between the Common Purpose networks and child abusers, that's when Common Purpose sent their legal letter to me warning me off that they were going to take action if I didn't stop talking about it. Later, of course, we were able to talk about Matthew Byrne, another Common Purpose Advisory Board member, horrific abuses, and he was operating in Merseyside. It went quiet after that. Well, let's hop to Islington because report is out conducted by a QC into the former mayor of Islington, Sandy Marks. This is the front cover of the Islington Gazette. Encourage people to go and have a look at it. So on the left-hand side of your screen, the lady to the left in the dungarees is Sandy Marks in the early days, and on the right as she is now. It's all pretty mucky stuff because if you have a look at some of the documents that the paper has exposed, there's some quotes here from an organisation called Fallen Angels. I'll come on to that. Paedophilia is dismissed as inevitably exploitative given the power of adults over children. But given that power, we insist that adults examine their existing relations with children and the ways in which all adults rationalise their own paedophilia while dismissing and silencing the child's eroticism. So let's put this together. So this is the lady. Now, she was actually in charge of Islington Social Services Committee when the child abuse scandal broke. That's back to the 1990s. She later became mayor, so she was clearly part of the Islington establishment. But she was linked to Fallen Angels pro-paedophile activist group in the 1980s. The group campaigned to abolish the age of consent laws and condemn child protection as a racket. Seems to me they knew a little bit too much about it because they were telling the truth there. Also campaigned for charges against the paedophile information exchange to be dropped, so they were protecting other paedophiles. Documents shown to the Gazette show that she attended a meeting with Tom O'Carroll from PI. She denies that. Another document suggests she planned to write a book with paedophile activist Tim Brown. He signed a letter to a paedophile Love and Kisses. She also denies that. And in 1980, Fallen Angels produced a paedophilia and public morals document calling for legalisation of sex with children. Now, this has all been the subject of an inquiry. This is the lady who has actually conducted that inquiry. And let's have a look at some of the things she said, Miss Morgan has said. In the report, Miss Morgan says, Miss Marks' work as chair of the Social Services Committee, which covered children's services, was likely not affected by her past involvement with Fallen Angels, a radical pro-paedophile activist group. But she admits it doesn't sit easily that someone could be associated with an organisation so malign, and yet in the years following that association, it had no detectable impact on her conduct of a role in a public office, which included the oversight of the welfare of children in care. And David, before I get you to just comment on this, she went on and said the paper went on and said it'll make disappointing reading for the Islington Survivors Network, which is led by former social worker Dr. Liz Davis, the original whistleblower into physical and sexual abuse taking place across Islington's children's homes in the 70s, 80s and 90s, because the group hoped that this latest report by Miss Morgan QC would open that original inquiry again. I'm going to say my personal opinion is this is a whitewash. How could any educated person, QC or not, calmly say that somebody who'd been involved with a virulent paedophile campaigning organisation was then clear of all that entailed during her subsequent career with children? How could she possibly say that?
I've no idea. It seems naive in the extreme. As she's clearly not a stupid woman, it must be intentional. I mean, obviously, we've got the precautionary principle. Firstly, you wouldn't have anyone with that sort of background in charge of looking after children. And remember, it was industrial scale abuse through the children's homes of Islington Council that was going on. And the person most significantly in charge was pro-paedophile. But these things we've been told are not related. They must think we came down with the last shower of rain.
Yes, I think they do. But I'll just point out that the Survivors group have put up a great deal of information on their site. So if you can have a look at that, please do. But one of the things they point out, of course, is that Keith Vaz was also involved with that particular council at one point, and he himself is under investigation at the moment. However, that's all gone behind closed doors in Westminster.
So what's
And,
next?
well, I
Back
think-
to Scotland.
Yes, I'm going to say I think this leads us nicely onto LGBT because although it may upset a few people, when you look into the history of the LGBT movement, it has been a little too close to some of the pro-paedophile organisations in some areas. David?
Yes, so this was announced with great celebration by the Scottish Government, by the Green Party, by the SNP, and by various others, that we are now going to make Scotland the first country in the world to have LGBT education into every school, every state school in the land. So this was viewed as hugely beneficial, and it will include teaching of LGBTI terminology and identities, tackling homophobia and prejudice, and the history of the equalities movement. So there we go. Education Secretary John Swiddy said this would help promote understanding and inclusion amongst all students. And the move was welcomed by Time for Inclusive Education, or TIE, a campaign group, who called it a historic moment. The Christian Institute said controversial political agendas, and let's remember that's what it is, should not be embedded in the curriculum. And I think they have a point, as we're seeing more and more government indoctrination embedded in the curriculum. Now, I have many questions about this, and I'll be coming back to this in later weeks, but just want to highlight the issues today. Here's the Green Party. They're over the moon about it. You see them all smiling here. It's the Scottish Greens welcome inclusive education commitment. Quote, this just won't transform lives when delivered, it will save lives. So that's how important they think it is. Now, I question this actually costs lives, right? Because you know the rule of unintended consequences with government programs usually applies. Will they be doing a happy smiling photo op and taking responsibility for that? I think not. Now, where does this come from? Well, this is where it gets a little strange, because it's a little European. It's a 2013 report, and it was written here, Scottish Government equality outcomes. Now, I point out, if you're looking for equality of outcome, you're talking about tyranny, because that's the only way you can get equality of outcome with people who are all inherently different. This report was written in 2013, and in true European style, was going to put in the fence, put in the shelf, and it's just left there for 5 years to see if anyone objects. And when no one does, we then roll it into public policy. Now, the report says the views expressed in this report are those of the researcher and do not necessarily represent those of the Scottish Government or Scottish ministers. That's very interesting. So I immediately went to see who the researcher was. And do you know, it doesn't say. It's entirely anonymous. So we'll try and get an answer on that one and find out who actually is making our policy, because this is now government policy. And it then lists a whole series of references. And of course, none of these references are from anyone who is dealing with the harm that comes out from the LGBT culture or the problems that we know. It's all put down to prejudice, right? The only explanation they offer is it's prejudice. It's the nasty existing society not welcoming people who are different. That's it. That's all to see. All there is to see. the possibility that aspects of this lifestyle are actually actively harmful for people doesn't seem to be considered. It doesn't seem to be included in the education. And I wonder what, for example, traditional Christian values are going to be treated like in the classroom as this is rolled out, because it's clearly not compatible. So there are many questions. We'll try and get to the bottom of some of them.
Okay, David. Well, what a fantastic lead into this. As I was driving home the other day, I was listening to BBC Radio 4, which started to talk about children's services, child protection services. Said they were near crisis, and they then quickly got talking about money. And what they started to say was that basically, if families could be given more help, then children wouldn't need to go into homes. It wasn't so much that was good for the families, but the local authorities and the government would be able to save money. And the BBC interviewed people on this. They were clearly very, very keen. But I was curious, why the sudden BBC interest? Well, hold that in your minds and let's just switch to a different subject. Because this is the Daily Mail pointing out that J.K. Rowling, who's worth some 650 million, is in the process of taking one of her aides to court because she says the lady stole £24,000 from her. And there's a very long spiel about how this court action is going to take place north of the border. So it's in your territory, David. Now, I was very interested in the article, not so much for the sort of the offence of stealing, but because it mentioned this. Rowling founded and is president of the Loomis Foundation. I wasn't aware of what that was, so I went to have a look at it. I've got a little bit of video from that website because we've now got children belong in families, and it's advertised by a little bit of Harry Potter cartoon wizardry in which we see hands reaching up to create a child. And it'll go back to what I consider to be a picture of an embryo in a minute. So we've got child protection has suddenly become part of Harry Potter. So if we have a look at the trustees for Lumos, very interested to see Danny Cohen there because he's ex-BBC. We've got James Harding, he's director of BBC News.
Not anymore, actually, he's just recently left.
Correct, he's just gone, all right, former director. We've got BBC Tanya Matty, we've got a real estate lady, we've got somebody from Barnardo's, and we've got ex-Goldman Sachs banker, and of course we've got, I've nearly said the witch, I didn't mean that, the wizard herself, J.K. Rowling. And it's fascinating that the BBC is reporting all of this on children. Why are they tied up with this through trustees who've got clear links? Well, if we come back to this lady, let's look at what she says. Tanya says, "It's an honour to join the Loomis board. It's a small, dynamic, effective charity with a clear focus to get children out of the damaging environment of institutions and into loving family and community-based care. As a disabled woman with first-hand experience of the care system, I admire the way Lumos works strategically with governments, NGOs and other agencies to close down institutions with evidence-based practical solutions to ensure every child counts." Now, they're not only working in England, because Volant here is also working in Scotland, but isn't it fascinating, David, just as we are starting to get truth out about the massive abuse in institutions, we now seem to have a government plan run through charities with the help of Harry Potter to close down institutions. What a good way to get rid of the bodies, to use that expression.
Indeed, and I was struck by an article on the BBC website this week by Ms. Holt that which looked broadly at the nature of the care system and had a huge number of statistics, and it showed, for example, that the number of children cared in Scotland is very much greater than any other part of the UK. It also showed that the number of children actually being cared for in residential institutions is declining extremely rapidly and is being replaced by foster care.
Right. And we know, of course, that local authorities cannot protect children in foster care. Melanie Shaw, one of the classic examples of that. But I'm just going to leave people to think that we are now using Harry Potter capability supposedly to protect children. I believe this is some sort of oxymoron, but we'll do more work on it in the future. David, we'll leave things on that note. Before we go, just like to say thank you very much for the donation which we received this morning. I just thought I'd put this little note on screen which came with it. So if you sent us that donation, thank you very much. But of course, a big thank you to everybody else who's donated to the UK column. And it's only by your financial help that we can get going. I can see there's a big storm brewing outside, Mike. Okay, David, thank you very much for joining us. UK column will be back at the same time on Monday.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.